Welcome to NovoEDTalks, where we reveal real-world strategies and expert insights from learning and development professionals. In every episode, we chat with practitioners, course designers, learning strategists, and business leads. We hear about their experiences in the learning industry and predictions for the profession and the trends that they're seeing. But before we get started, a little bit about NovoEd. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoEd is a people-centric, capability-building platform that combines social and collaborative learning to drive performance readiness at scale. Through cohort-based experiences centered around human interaction, NovoEd taps into collective wisdom, placing each learner at the center of perspective, application, and expertise. Large enterprises such as 3M, GE, Marriott International, and Nestle partner with NovoEd to accelerate their critical initiatives, reconnect teams, and achieve rapid alignment through learning that is felt, experienced, and swiftly transformed into impact. Now, let's meet our guest for today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast, a space for training trailblazers to get real. My name is Melissa Fisk. I'm the producer of the NovoEDTalks podcast, and today I am joined by Kim White, founder of Kim White Wow Consulting. Kim is an IO psychologist and organizational strategist who helps fast-growing startups and small to mid-sized businesses thrive. As someone trained to think but built to do, Kim provides strategic and hands-on consulting that results in immediate practical solutions for complex problems. She brings calm to the chaos by helping companies work on what matters, what she calls the wow, by aligning people, processes, and purpose. Kim, I love that. I love anything that brings calm to any situation. We are so honored to have you here today on the NovoEDTalks podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for having me. I love this podcast, so it is really a pleasure to be a guest.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start by just kind of introducing yourself, talking about your company a little bit more. I love how you've come up with WOW. That's such a cool acronym for what you do. So why don't you just jump right into that and talk a little bit more about it?
Sure, thank you. Really, throughout my career, I had this incredible benefit of being in smaller companies or startups who worked with Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies. So I didn't actually have to work in an enterprise or size organization to get insights into how other businesses were run. And it really fast-tracked my knowledge. So I was learning about the organization I was in, and I was being exposed to like hundreds of other organizations at the same time. And that really afforded me this perspective. And I became more and more intrigued about what makes a company succeed versus fail, and what is the environment where a company truly thrives and employees are really happy versus there's lots of toxicity and the company is really struggling. So with that perspective, I layered on top a master's degree in organizational psychology or IO psychology and learned sort of some of the formal concepts and was able to layer those on top of the practicality. Sometimes what we learn in terms of theories and practice are great, but when we're really in the moment inside a company, it doesn't always work perfectly. So I was able to balance sort of the practicality with the theoretical, and especially IO psychology being rooted in data science. It really gives us, some meat to how we look at the life cycle of an organization and where a company is and where it wants to go. Often in those experiences, what I kept taking away was how a company learns is really important, and what a company focuses on really matters. And so I became a little bit obsessed with how can I help companies get rid of the noise, lean into the signal, and focus on what really matters to the organization. So I decided in this last part of my career, that's really what I wanted to focus on, is helping younger companies, startup companies, smaller companies scale and grow.
I love that. I think for really any company, any size, like obviously there's different things that we're told at, this stage, you need to be focused on this and this and this and this and doing this. And then there's new tools and yada, yada, yada. So it is really overwhelming. So there's definitely a need for exactly what you do. So I love that you're doing that. Could you talk a little bit about, who are some of the different like learners that you've worked with and like what are some of the challenges that matter that they are facing?
Sure. Again, I've been really fortunate to experience the spectrum. So when I was a product leader for a while and I got to really be firsthand with learners, I had this great experience in New York City in a very, very well-known publisher, sitting with pretty much the whole company, team after team, hearing from them directly, here's what we thought of your learning program and here's how we experienced it. And there's nothing like that firsthand frontline feedback. And then
Yeah.
I've worked, all the way through, teams, C-suite and CEO. So I've had the benefit of the full spectrum of learners, and it taught me that there is a spectrum and it's very different. So what motivates your 9 to 5 employee, your frontline worker, is very different than what might motivate a VP. And if we don't recognize that and build that into the learning, then we're going to have a bit of a problem. So I think you have to look across the spectrum of what is motivating each person, in some ways almost in a very individual way, and not make the mistake of thinking that the audience is a monolith. So this is all one person. I've worked with teams who viewed the learning audience as they're just like me. They love to learn. They may not be. They may not be. So really recognizing that. And I think if there's a universal, and I think there are a few universal concerns, it's time. I don't have time. I'm
Yeah.
doing my job. Plus, somebody just left. I'm doing their job. I'm doing 2 jobs. I'm doing 3 jobs. I don't have time. I don't have time to upgrade my skills. I don't have time to learn. And that feeling of overwhelm, I think, is pretty universal right now, from C-suite on down. Everybody's feeling a little pressed, a lot of dis-ease, not
Yeah.
certain what tomorrow is going to be or next year. And from HR in particular, I'm hearing a lot of concern around upskilling. So how
Hmm.
do I take where the workforce is today? How do I figure out where it needs to be? And then how do I close that gap? And fortunately, that's kind of what IO psychologists do. So
Yeah. No, that's true. And I think you're very right. And that everyone's kind of feeling a lot of pressure of like, with the advancement of technology, AI, which I'm sure we're going to get into on a deeper level here throughout this interview. But I think that's very, very true. And everyone's feeling different pressures in different ways. So I think it's so important that we acknowledge that as L&D folks. Talk to me a little bit about, some of the bigger workforce development challenges that you see kind of facing organizations, and how do you suggest folks approach those at their organizations?
yeah, I mean that's such a timely and important question, because I think it's the question that is probably everyone is waking up with these days. Obviously, we're in the throes of AI, and AI is disrupting every system, just about, from the medical community to grade school. Like, everybody is being affected. And in the learning space, I think there's a lot of great opportunity, but with great change comes the challenge of how do I adapt to that change? So what do I need to do? And I think the other interesting thing about AI as a tech disruptor is that it's really sort of forcing us. I think we were really leaning into programmatic learning for a while. And by programmatic learning, I mean we've created this online self-directed learning experience. Maybe you go through it alone, or you go through it with a group of people.
Sure.
But here it is, oh, we need to learn about communication. Here's a prepackaged learning experience. Everyone just go through that.
Yeah.
And I think exactly. And I think we started to lean a little too hard into that. And we forgot that there's some other ways to learn, like mentoring and hands-on experience. So I think that AI is perhaps, and I think this is a really good call to action, that it's forcing us to rethink our reliance on programmatic learning and revisit this concept of, even with programmatic learning, we really need context, right? I need to know, why should I learn this? And I need to know, as I go through it, am I getting the concepts right? So I need some check-ins. I also need, after the learning, some reinforcement. I need to know, how do I apply this? I need some chances to call that information back, so I build it to deep learning. So the advent of, or this integration of AI into the learning space, I think, is good, because it's forcing us to not sort of package up learning. It's calling for all of us sort of go through this together as learners. So rather than saying, oh, I'm the boss, now all of you go through this communication thing. We're all trying to learn AI together. So we're all like, what are you using? Which chat do you like? And ooh, how'd you do that? So it's sort of leveling the playing field in a way that I think is probably good for those of us in the space who approach it more theoretically or more from sort of we're the sage approach. It's sort of reminding all of us what it is to be a learner.
Yeah.
And it's also calling for us to maybe for the first time we can really lean in to individualizing learning. And so I don't think that necessarily means the death of programmatic learning. I just think that with AI and agentic AI, we have the opportunity now to build coaches into learning experiences. I remember talking to a woman who was running a hospital on the East Coast. This is maybe 7 or 8 years ago. She had a learning program to support nurses. She so wanted a little nurse coach to be in the learning program and somebody who could guide them and answer questions. And basically, she was trying to replicate herself. And
Yeah.
we saw her vision. We were excited about her vision. We just didn't have the way to do it, right? I mean, it wasn't. We could feel it, but we just weren't there in the technology. And now I think we are on the cusp of, and I know some people are working on it already, these tools that really can respond us to maybe say, hey, Melissa, before we get started, how are you feeling today? Oh, you're tired. You were up all night with the sick kid. Okay, let's keep today's lesson short. Let's get right to the point, and we're going to cut out the extra stuff. So, like a learning experience that adapts in a very personal way is possible, and we're right on the cusp of that. If we approach this in the right way, right, which is openness, curiosity, willingness to lean in. And so this is a time of a real call to action. Those of us, especially in the learning space, to practice what we preach a little bit and become learners ourselves.
Absolutely. There's so much of what you said right there that I love, Kim. Like, I love that concept of like, we're all like comparing it to how we're all learning AI right now. It's like we're all, and the best way to do so is, talking to one another about it. How are you using it? How are you doing that? So I love that, using that real life approach that we're all experiencing as professionals and applying it to any kind of learning program that we have to deploy for our learners, I think is such a good thing to keep in mind and keep it real and authentic and organic. I love that. And I also love, the context you gave around personalization, because we hear personalization, right? And like, you think it's like, oh, just this is my job title and my role. So here's a personalized like learning track. But what you're saying is on a much more deeper human level, which I think is so important. And to your point, can happen if we do approach it that way and recognize that that's like the real personalization that we need as learners in an environment. That's so great there. Talking about, obviously, skill sets are changing, as what people's roles are doing is completely changing day to day. They're having to learn new things. And as those skill sets needed for success continue to shift, what strategies do you recommend folks, implement at their organizations to make sure that their workforce remains adaptable and prepared?
I think that the thing that a company can do that really benefits all change, whether it's AI, and I mean, and a lot of things I'm going to say today, I will call back to the fact that this is just good practice in general, whether it's AI or it's some other sort of tech or some other sort of change like a merger or a new CEO. I think that leaders in the organization can really first role model the curiosity and play. And again, I think this is something that's been long overdue and long needed in organizations. When we think about how to be successful as a company, we kind of forget to play. We get caught up in our goals and our KPIs and our targets. And especially if you have a board of directors and you've got some stakeholders, maybe you're a public company, you're always sort of feeding up the chain, whatever needs to happen. And in doing so, I think we've tended to lean into a little bit of seriousness, and we've forgotten how to be learning organizations. So we've forgotten how to lead with curiosity, and it's really easy to fall into fear. And I know AI has brought so much concern around, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to be replaced? And it's really easy to get succumbed by that fear. But again, I think the best way forward in any kind of change is to just experiment, lead with curiosity, just take a deep breath. And if that means you've got to go to extra yoga classes or learn how to meditate or whatever you have to do, individually, I know a lot of organizations are instituting meditation practices. We are in a time of great change, which means overwhelm. And again, I think each of us have to find our way through how do I focus? And as an organization, what we can do to help people is one, just from leadership teams, from the C-suite. Employees really need clear leadership and clear and focus, just some focus. And it might mean that you learn one step at a time, right? So rather than thinking, and with AI, it is so easy to think, well, I got to figure out how to do this with AI, not because there is so much all at once coming toward us, but really just asking ourselves, where are we? Right? So let's not worry about what a fintech company is doing if we are not fintech.
Yeah.
If we're not fintech, then they're not the best example for us, or med tech, or if we're not SaaS, or if we're not B2B, don't worry about B2B. Let's focus on and start with where are we? Who are we? What are we trying to do? And now how can we start to pull some AI into that? So modeling as an organization a bit of strategy, so this is how hey everybody, let's have a conversation about this. Here's how we're going to approach this. Here's how we think AI and what's happening in the technology space is best going to serve us. And we want to hear from you. What do you think? And we approach this rationally and with a certain calm. Again, that is kind of one of my calling cards, but it's because I believe deeply, and I know the research supports it. We don't make good decisions when we're in fear mode. When we're living back here in the amygdala and we're not in our thinking brain, we are going to not make some great decisions. So just trying to approach this calmly. And I think that leadership can really remember that employees look to you.
Yeah.
So let us know how we're going to do this, and be honest and be open. And let's just, this is an insanely fun time to be in the workspace. Let's just take a moment, all of us, and recognize what an incredible thing we're going through, and to embrace that a little bit and have a little fun with it.
I love that. I think that's so important because it can be so overwhelming and and scary in some ways. So if you can just, stay calm, have fun, I think it combats those two things. And I love the piece about bringing in strategy, because we're all guilty of that. All it takes is logging onto LinkedIn and seeing oh, because everyone's opinionated with their posts where it's this is what you should be doing. Don't miss out on doing this and blah, blah, blah. And it gets so easy to just log into, that's just one little platform, one little window, where you can log in and all of a sudden be pulled in 100 different things, or we're not doing that here, or I don't believe that. So what am I doing? And should I read this article? Should I get this tool? Blah, 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 blah. And I think it's just cut out the noise a little bit. And what are we trying to do? And what's something that could help us do it better, instead of just reinventing this whole new thing,
Right. Yeah, it should be additive, right?
Yes.
I mean, AI should, a good friend of mine, Jamie Brett, who's kind of an AI revolutionary, he always says it should augment, right?
Yeah.
It should augment what we're doing. So let's not think of it as replace, which feels a little bit like, oh, I got to relearn everything.
Yeah.
And everything I've done is now not going to matter. And that's really just largely not true. Most organizations are just moving along just as they were. Are they being disrupted? Yes. But there are some choices there in how much we disrupt and in what ways we disrupt. So leaning into AI as just, again, it's a thing, it's a tool, and let's use it in a way that is additive to what we were already doing. We don't necessarily have to scrap every part of what we've done and what we were doing.
Absolutely. This kind of leads into my next question, in a way. But if you're looking, do you have core KPIs that you suggest that folks use? And I think, kind of what we're talking about here is, obviously it's a case by case basis, but how do you suggest people kind of come up with KPIs or approach KPIs in general? Because this is a question or a challenge I feel like that comes up for everyone in this space.
Yeah, I first I'll say, do have some. I have worked with many companies who did not really have any measures. So please do have some measures. I worked with a company years ago that did something so simple and so impactful that I recommend this to everyone that I've worked with. Have a personal development learning goal as whether you do OKRs, KPIs, doesn't matter. What we're talking about is some sort of measurement of performance. And one of those measures should be around a learning and development goal. So not do we have one, check mark, but getting clear with an employee at the beginning of the year, whenever you do annual review time, picking a really appropriate personal development goal with some really clear, smart goals, right? That's all I'm saying here is just, are they smart? Can we measure them? Can we observe them? Are we going to keep that person accountable for some clear steps toward that goal? Whatever it is. And so if it's appropriate now that it's AI, then maybe what it looks like is I'm going to set up Claude. I'm going to get to know all the different tools on Claude. I'm going to watch some YouTube videos about Claude. I've found there's a user group. I'm going to join that. And so whatever that looks like, but making sure that it is clear from an organizational perspective, we expect you to learn and we're going to be measuring you. And whether it's learning or whatever it is, those two things, which are not complex, which don't require any extra software, we could write that down on a piece of paper. If we had to, we could put it in an Excel spreadsheet. You don't necessarily have to have Workday or any sort of performance management software, but many companies do. But you don't really need anything to do those two things. So just setting a clear personal development, personal learning goal, and then measuring that and holding that employee accountable does better than anything to really set a tone for, we expect you to learn here, we expect you to grow, and we want to see you grow, and we want you to be a co-author in what way you grow and develop.
Yeah, I love that. And I think keeping it simple is something like keeping it simple and to that point, can be very powerful. And then you can kind of work together to create like what it is that you're going to be measuring depending on what it is that you're going to be learning. I think that's great. Do you have an example of a successful case study or initiative, mentoring, L&D initiative, anything kind of touching this space, that you could talk a little bit to?
Sure. The most successful program that I was a part of was several years ago in an organization with a couple of other people. I co-authored a learning program that was probably the most effective, most cost-effective learning program. And I mean, I've been a part of things that took months to more than a year to create. And this one, we really just pieced it together through some conversations. And what it was at the beginning of the year, we had a special kickoff call for everyone in the company. And we kicked off basically a personal development learning initiative. Everybody was invited to pick something that meant something to them. So for some people, for example, in the engineering team, they picked, I want to learn this programming language, or I want to build something with this language. Other people picked, I want to host a webinar. I've never hosted, or I want to be on a podcast. And everyone picked something very personal to them, their choice. We organized them into learning triads, so they had some accountability partners, some people who could support them, give them advice if they were stuck. And they were expected at some point during the year to share back. So I can't say enough about lunch and learn, share backs, whatever you call them, but it's cohort learning, it's peer learning. And at some point during the year, each person then shared back, here was my goal, here's how I did it, here's what I learned. And by doing that, a couple of really incredible things happened. The first thing that happened was the buzz around, I get to choose my learning journey, just catapulted morale. Just everybody was engaged. Everyone was excited. The company did offer to support, for example, if you were going to get a certification, they would help pay for that exam, et cetera. So there was just so much excitement around it. And the chance for, one thing that we had heard so much at this particular company was, I want to learn and grow as an individual. I want to get some leadership experience. So this gave everybody the chance to present to the company, to figure out how to teach what they learned, to answer questions, to share back, and to really behave as a leader. And it gave everybody the opportunity to step into that kind of, so it was a multi-layered growth opportunity. The cost to do that was a few hours of conversation by those of us who created it. We leaned into the tools they already had, Gmail, Slack, Google Docs, and we purchased nothing extra other than anything in support of individual learning paths. And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And it ended up, one of the co-authors and we actually spoke at the ATD conference that following year on the main stage about that program, because it had been so powerful, and it really instilled in me that some of the best solutions are the elegant ones, the really simple and clean ones, the really practical. Sometimes we tend to overthink and over-engineer what we're trying to do. And that was a really wonderful example of how to do something low cost with just incredible benefit.
Yeah, I think you can't even really speak to all the benefits, but just like on a level that, it makes the person doing the lunch and learn feel empowered that they're teaching, and it's peer-to-peer learning. So it's like they're receiving it better, they're giving it better. It's just like overall, I feel like such a great initiative. That's so cool. Thinking a little bit, obviously we've been talking about AI and how, AI should be used to augment, things that we're doing and help, and not kind of overtake and replace it in every instance. But, what role do you see technology playing? And, are there specific tools or platforms that people should be considering, like using to enhance their programs?
Sure. Well, obviously, at this point, it's pretty hard unless you're taking care of a butterfly garden. And even then, I think you're probably going to be using some tech on, doing a count of the butterflies or how they're adapting to the new food. So it's really hard to ignore it. I think, again, starting small and just focusing, like, if let's say I'm talking to somebody who hasn't done anything yet, really, I would say just start with generative AI. So look at purchasing a pro version of one of the chat tools. So maybe it's Copilot, it's Gemini, Claude, it's Perplexity. There's so many even to name right now. There's so many in the space. But pick one. Maybe it's just ChatGPT, because that's kind of the most popular. Pick one, purchase the pro version, roll it out. Again, encourage people to use it. Do sharing sessions. If somebody already knows it well, maybe they'd be willing to do a little teaching session for everyone, and just get comfortable with engaging with chat. That's kind of the easiest, most comfortable way to get involved. And then beyond that, maybe you can step into agentic AI and start figuring out how to automate some workflows. But I would say mostly from an organizational perspective, even starting by just pulling everybody together and saying, okay, who's doing what? I mean, I worked with a company really closely a couple of years ago, and that's exactly the path that we took, which is like, well, okay, hey, everybody, what are you doing? And we found out that some of the programmers were already using it to program. We found out some of the writers were already using it to write. And we just started to share with each other, like, here's what we're doing, and here's what we know, and here's what we don't know. So yeah, I think really just, at least at the minimum, using ChatGPT in some way, or some LLM in some way, and then moving into workflow automation and moving into efficiency. But I think the great thing about ChatGPT is it's a little charming in a way, right? It kind of pulls you in, even if you were very resistant to it. It kind of starts to win you over, of like, oh, wow, I can see how that would have taken me days to research that a couple of years ago, and now it takes 1 second. So maybe there's something here for me. So that's how I would start. Just very, just a slow, maybe not slow, but just an easy entry point, and then see who's getting comfortable with what, and just remember to share with each other.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's such a good point, that's such a good entry level AI point, because it starts training your brain to be like, oh, could I like take this part of my day?
Mhm.
And you're like,
Yep.
let me see how like ChatGPT is gonna like help me with it. And it's like, okay,
Sure.
that's not exactly, but like I could see how maybe there's a tool out there and then you can like go from there. So I love that as like a start, like a great, like just
Yeah.
start getting in there, playing around with it, using it like when you can for your day to day to see what you can maybe streamline to
Sure.
get more efficient. That's great.
Yeah,
Um,
and you can even use, AI can be very meta. So
mhm.
you can ask AI, you can say, hey, this
Yes.
is who I am, this is what I do at my job, these are some of my challenges. AI, how can I best use AI? And it will tell you.
Yeah, it's great. Um, thinking about, obviously we've been talking about technology, AI specifically. So obviously, if we're looking back at learning and development programs over the last 5 years, that's a big takeaway for how things have changed and adapted. But, from your perspective, what are some of the key kind of takeaways that you've seen over these past 5 years, maybe at a higher level, not a specific technology per se, but just kind of
Mhm.
key takeaways from the last 5 years in this space?
Yeah, I think really know how to fail and be comfortable with failing. Again, I think this is something that's sort of a gift of AI and a gift of a time period when we all feel a little stupid. Let's face it. We all feel like we're the dumb guy in the room at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe not everybody, but a lot of us do.
Yeah.
Um, Remembering that it's okay to fail and being willing to fail, I think is really, really critical. And again, something that as leaders, I think we need to model. Learning isn't just about getting the answer right the first time. And we're not really taught we're not really taught anywhere at school. I didn't learn it in grade school. I didn't learn it in my master's program. Nobody taught me how to fail. We do
Right.
sometimes encounter it, in sports. Sports is really good at this concept of you're going to practice, practice, practice and until you win. And I think, leaning into some of those concepts in the sporting world where athletes have coaches and pro athletes have many coaches. They might have a psychology coach, they might have a physiology coach.
Yeah.
Baseball players might have batting coaches, hitting coaches. So leaning into this idea of I'm not the expert, that's okay. I'm going to make mistakes, and that's okay. That's that. A friend of mine always says learning is messy, and
Yeah.
it is and should be messy. Embrace this concept of it's okay to fail, and leaders, you will need to role model that you do not have to be the expert all the time.
Yeah, I love that. We had someone on the podcast a couple of months ago who talked about how they almost used two things that you talked about, turned like a lunch and learn type initiative into like sharing their failures and like what they learned from it, and like to
Mhm.
create this kind of culture of we want you to fail. It's okay to
Mhm.
fail. Some of the best lessons come from it. Like they had like a name for like
Yeah.
a really cute name for the programs around failing, but I just loved that. I was like, I think that's so great. And like to, embrace it and talk about it because yeah, we don't learn how to do that. We're told to, do better, do better, do better. And like not like, hey, play with your failure a little bit and like to understand it a little bit. So I really, really love that. I think that's great.
Yeah, we're tested on accuracy. In fact, something really funny I read a couple of days ago around AI was that some studies have now shown that the learning language models hallucinate because they weren't taught it was okay to say, I don't know. There was actually in the background, there's a bit of a point system. And so the model is rewarded when it comes back with a confident answer. Nobody thought to reward it for saying, I don't know. So we're actually replicating our own bias towards perfection versus failing. We've actually put that into the learning language models.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Wow. Anyway, Kim, sorry, that just like really, wow, kind of blew my mind there. Kim, to close on a positive note, what would you say the most important lesson is that you've learned on your journey that you would pass on to someone just starting out on theirs?
I would say, especially for leaders, but really for everyone, to me, success relies on curiosity, experimentation, and that willingness to fail. And leaders, your mindset really paves the way for everyone else. If you're uptight about learning, your team's going to be uptight. You don't believe in failure, your team's not going to believe in failure. You really paved the path. You set the tone. So make sure it's a really positive tone. And finally, I would say, and I always like to end, whether it's a podcast or a webinar or whatever, I always try to end on this note. Don't overthink it. Solutions might be simpler. Let's not overthink and over engineer how to get somewhere. And if you need help, seek help. Whether that's someone to help you think through it, it's a partner, it's someone outside your company, it's a professional company, it's a consulting company. If you feel lost and don't know which way to go, reach out and have somebody help you. It is often easier to solve these things than we think it is. And it's just a matter of a fresh perspective or a fresh voice or someone just a little more experienced in dealing with that kind of issue. So if you feel stuck, just reach out for help.
I love that. Great. All of those great little tidbits of helpful information that I think could help anyone really in any position at any stage in life, because I think we can all continue to do better at all of those things. Kim, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the NovoEDTalks today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Awesome. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of NovoEDTalks. Hello.